The chamber was alive with anticipation, the kind that makes every whispered word feel like it could tip the balance of history. Kash Patel leaned back in his chair, chest slightly forward, a self-assured smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The cameras caught him in slow motion, every blink and shift exaggerated, every gesture amplified. He believed he was untouchable, ready to deliver his lines with the polished confidence of someone who had faced scrutiny before, and walked away unscathed. "Let's be clear," Patel began, voice smooth, practiced, each word measured as if rehearsed 1,000 times. "There is absolutely no evidence to support these allegations." His gaze swept the room, pausing on reporters, colleagues, and the few who dared to raise their eyebrows in silent question. He radiated certainty, an aura that suggested anyone who doubted him was simply mistaken, naive, or irrelevant. Then came the pause. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett shifted slightly, a quiet motion unnoticed by most. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, fixed on Patel like a lighthouse cutting through fog. She did not rise, did not clutch her papers, did not betray the slightest hint of panic. She simply inhaled once, deliberately, and opened her mouth. "Respectfully, sir," Crockett began, her tone steady, authoritative, the words slicing through the chamber like sunlight through a storm. "That statement is not only misleading, it is provably false." A subtle ripple ran through the room. Papers rustled. Microphones caught the faint intake of breath from those who had thought they were prepared for anything. Patel's smirk faltered, a twitch at the edge of confidence. The cameras lingered, capturing the shift, his arrogance colliding with a calm he could not anticipate. Crockett's gaze never wavered. Her presence alone seemed to pull the air taut, thick with suspense. No one expected what she'd say next, not even Patel himself. The weight of her words hung in the air, a tension that threatened to snap. The audience watching, whether in that chamber or across screens, felt the charge, the sense that history might pivot in these moments, that one sentence could redefine the narrative entirely. But this wasn't even the moment that humiliated him. That part comes next. The stage had been set, the pieces in place, and in the silence that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the confrontation that no one would soon forget. The hearing was supposed to be procedural, a routine exchange meant to document facts, gather testimony, and for the most part, move quietly behind closed doors. But from the very first moment Patel spoke, it became clear this would be anything but ordinary. His words, delivered with that familiar air of authority, carried more than opinion, they carried influence. Every claim he made, every dismissal of evidence, had the power to shape public perception, to tilt the scales of accountability, and to determine whether truth would be honored or ignored. Congress was more than a building filled with politicians. It was a theater where the stakes were national, where the outcomes affected millions of lives. Decisions here didn't simply fade into reports, they echoed across communities, into homes, classrooms, and workplaces. Misinformation or arrogance at this level was not harmless. It threatened trust in institutions, undermined the faith of citizens who relied on facts, and set dangerous precedents for what could be considered acceptable in public discourse. When someone like Patel leaned into certainty, it wasn't just confidence, it was a weapon against clarity. The accusations on the table were not trivial. They touched on issues of oversight, accountability, and the integrity of government operations. Patel's insistence that there was absolutely no evidence was more than a statement. It was an attempt to rewrite the narrative, to place him above scrutiny. His record in previous hearings hinted at a pattern: deflect, charm, and avoid the hard truths. It was a strategy that often worked, leaving reporters frustrated, opposition members exasperated, and the public unsure where reality ended and rhetoric began. Into this charged atmosphere stepped Jasmine Crockett. Unlike others who had faced Patel before, she carried with her a reputation not for theatrics but for precision, for meticulous preparation, and for an unshakable commitment to truth. Her presence in the chamber was more than symbolic. It was a line drawn in the sand. By stepping forward, she signaled that someone in that room would not let arrogance dictate fact, that someone would hold the powerful accountable. The weight of expectation hovered over her, palpable, as if every pair of eyes, every camera lens, waited to see whether she would falter or rise. Because the moment Crockett opened her folder, the entire room shifted. What had been a static, almost rehearsed exchange became fluid, charged, and unpredictable. Even those who had seen her in action before felt a tremor of anticipation. Would she dismantle the narrative Patel had so carefully built? Would she expose the gaps he had spent years hiding behind? The tension was electric. Staffers leaned forward, pens hovering, as if to capture every detail. Reporters glanced at one another, sensing the story that would ripple far beyond this room. The stakes extended beyond individual reputations. This was a confrontation about values, about what it meant to serve the public with honesty, to confront misinformation with courage, and to honor the responsibility entrusted to elected officials. If Crockett didn't speak, if she allowed Patel's certainty to stand unchallenged, the cost would be measured not in political points but in public trust. And for an audience watching across states, continents even, it was a moment that defined what leadership could look like when courage and integrity refused to yield to arrogance. Every heartbeat in that chamber seemed magnified, each second stretching longer than the last. The room had shifted, the stage was set, and everyone watching knew. This was not just a hearing. This was a reckoning, a test of who would command history, and who would be remembered for standing in its way. Kash Patel had always carried himself with a certain unmistakable confidence, the kind that commanded attention before a single word left his lips. From the moment he entered the halls of power, his presence seemed to announce that he belonged, that he understood the rules, and more importantly, that he could bend them with precision. Staffers, colleagues, and even opponents had learned early on that Patel's confidence was as much a tool as his words. He knew how to project control, to fill a room with the aura of certainty, and to leave doubt lingering in the minds of those who questioned him. In hearings past, his style had been consistent: deflect, charm, and assert. When confronted with uncomfortable questions, he leaned back, smiled just enough to seem approachable, and delivered answers rehearsed to the point of perfection. His language was careful, almost theatrical, structured to give the appearance of openness while carefully avoiding any admissions that could be used against him. Critics called it evasive, supporters called it strategic. Either way, it worked. Time and again. He emerged from the spotlight with his reputation intact, his credibility seemingly unshaken, and his opponents frustrated. There were patterns in his behavior, subtle yet persistent. When facts contradicted his narrative, he didn't falter, he reframed. When evidence mounted against his position, he deployed charm as a shield, smiling and nodding in a way that disarmed questions without addressing them. Witnesses, journalists, and even fellow legislators noted the same thing. Patel had mastered the art of appearing cooperative while remaining untouchable. It was a skill honed over years, a combination of self-assurance, political instinct, and an almost uncanny ability to read his audience and adjust mid-sentence. Yet beneath this calculated confidence lay a tendency toward overreach. The very arrogance that had carried him through previous confrontations also left him vulnerable to moments he couldn't predict. Patel believed that preparation and projection could control any scenario. He trusted his instincts, relied on his prior successes, and assumed that those who challenged him would stumble under pressure. It was this assumption, this belief in his own infallibility, that made him both formidable and ultimately susceptible to exposure. Walking into the chamber that day, Patel carried all of this with him. The familiar confidence filled his posture, the slight tilt of his chin, the assured cadence of his voice. To the casual observer, he looked untouchable. He had rehearsed, anticipated objections, and mentally mapped every possible angle. But rehearsed confidence, no matter how polished, can crumble in the face of someone who is both prepared and fearless. Every smirk, every dismissive glance, every carefully measured word now teetered on the edge of irrelevance. This was not the first time Patel had faced opposition, but it was different this time. He did not yet know it, but across the room sat someone uniquely equipped to counter his every assertion, not with theatrics, but with precision, poise, and facts that could not be ignored. Someone whose calm intensity contrasted sharply with his own performative arrogance. His usual tactics, the ones that had carried him through countless hearings, were powerless against the meticulous strategy waiting quietly across the chamber. As the cameras clicked and the room held its collective breath, Patel's history of dismissiveness, his pattern of political spin, and his reliance on charm and overconfidence all loomed in stark relief. Each moment he had spent perfecting his image now served as a mirror, reflecting back the vulnerability he had never anticipated. What he didn't expect was the one person uniquely prepared to dismantle him, to challenge the very authority he had so long taken for granted. The stage was set, and for the first time, the equilibrium he relied upon was about to be tested in ways he had never encountered. Jasmine Crockett grew up in a neighborhood where resilience was not optional, it was survival. From a young age, she witnessed the quiet battles her family and community fought every day. Struggles for opportunity, for respect, for fairness. Her parents worked long hours, often juggling multiple jobs, yet they never wavered in instilling a sense of dignity, justice, and responsibility. They taught her that words mattered, that integrity was earned through action, and that the world often demanded courage before it offered recognition. Those lessons became the foundation of her character, shaping the woman who would one day step into the halls of Congress with a quiet, unshakable power. Even as a child, Crockett displayed an instinctive awareness of right and wrong. She noticed when others were dismissed or ignored, when truth was bent for convenience, and when voices were silenced simply because they were inconvenient. These observations fueled a deep-seated determination. She would not remain silent in the face of injustice. Teachers and mentors noticed her early potential, guiding her through debate clubs, community service, and local advocacy. They encouraged her to channel her energy into structured argumentation, to turn empathy into strategy, and to transform righteous indignation into tangible results. Each challenge she faced reinforced her belief that knowledge and preparation were her most powerful tools. Her journey into law was a natural extension of these early lessons. Crockett thrived in an environment where facts, reasoning, and advocacy converged. She became known for her meticulous preparation, her ability to dissect complex issues, and her unwavering calm in the face of opposition. Courtrooms became arenas where she could combine intellect with moral clarity, where she could confront inequity not with bluster but with precision. Over time, her reputation grew. Colleagues and opponents alike recognized that Crockett could cut through obfuscation, expose falsehoods, and present the truth in a way that was impossible to ignore. Beyond her legal career, Crockett was drawn to civil rights work. She understood that justice was not a concept to be studied from afar. It was a living, breathing fight that demanded participation. She advocated for communities that had been marginalized, representing individuals whose stories were often ignored by mainstream narratives. Through this work, she honed a skill that would later define her political career: the ability to elevate facts and voices above rhetoric, to create clarity in chaos, and to make truth resonate with people on a deeply personal level. When Crockett entered politics, it was not for ambition but for responsibility. She recognized that laws and policies affected real lives, that leadership required courage, and that power without accountability was a dangerous thing. Her path to Congress was marked by perseverance, grounded in the lessons of her upbringing and the discipline of her advocacy. She carried with her the voices of her community, the mentors who had guided her, and the experiences that had shaped her understanding of justice. Every step she took was informed by the knowledge that speaking truth to power was not only necessary, it was urgent. Her signature style emerged early in her political career and became a hallmark of her public presence. She spoke calmly, with deliberate pacing, allowing each word to land with clarity. Her arguments were precise, rooted in verifiable evidence, and delivered with a quiet authority that demanded attention without resorting to theatrics. Opponents often underestimated her because she did not raise her voice or seek dramatic flair, only to find themselves exposed by the sharpness of her reasoning and the inevitability of her conclusions. For Crockett, substance always outweighed performance. Facts always outweighed spin. This approach carried into the hearing with Kash Patel. For her, this was more than a procedural exchange. It was a moment that embodied everything she had fought for: integrity in public service, accountability for those in power, and the defense of truth against arrogance and misdirection. Misinformation, especially at this level, was not abstract. It had consequences. Every evasive answer, every misleading claim, threatened to erode trust, distort reality, and diminish the dignity of the very institutions meant to protect the public. Crockett knew that standing firm was not merely a political necessity, it was a moral obligation. The weight of her past, the lessons of her upbringing, and the clarity of her convictions all converged in this moment. She was prepared not because she sought confrontation, but because she understood the cost of silence. She had honed her mind to anticipate arguments, trained her voice to command attention without force, and fortified her spirit against the intimidation tactics that often unsettled others. This was a culmination of years of experience, a demonstration of everything she had learned, and a reaffirmation of the values that had guided her from the streets of her childhood neighborhood to the chamber of Congress. What set Crockett apart was not just her intellect or preparation. It was her embodiment of the principle that truth carries weight, that courage is contagious, and that the right words, delivered with conviction, can shift the course of events. As she leaned forward, papers in hand, eyes unwavering, she was ready. Every moment of preparation, every challenge she had faced, had led to this intersection of history and integrity. And in that chamber, the stage was set for the confrontation that would define not only her career, but the very principles she stood for. The hearing had moved beyond formalities. What began as a measured exchange was now a battle of wits and willpower. A quiet war played out in gestures, glances, and carefully chosen words. Kash Patel leaned forward, voice smooth, as if each syllable had been carved from rehearsed certainty. "The reports clearly support my position," he said, his smirk returning, a shield against scrutiny. He scanned the room, confident, almost daring someone to challenge him. Jasmine Crockett's response was measured, deliberate. She inhaled slowly, letting the weight of his words settle before speaking. "Sir," she said, calm yet commanding, "the reports you reference omit critical context. They fail to address key findings that contradict your conclusions." The words cut through the room like a knife, precise and undeniable. The cameras lingered on her, capturing the subtle strength of her posture, the unwavering focus in her eyes. Staffers leaned in. Reporters adjusted their microphones, and a hush seemed to settle over the chamber. Patel's smirk flickered, almost imperceptibly. He pivoted, attempting to reclaim control. "I'm merely summarizing what has been presented," he replied, voice rising slightly, a subtle tremor betraying a crack in his armor. He gestured broadly, emphasizing the authority of his statement, but the force lacked the conviction it once held. Crockett, in contrast, maintained her composure. Her breathing was steady, her cadence calm, each word chosen to undermine without aggression, to expose gaps without theatrics. The exchange intensified. Patel interrupted, a practiced tactic meant to derail her rhythm. "With all due respect," he began, leaning into the cameras, eyes scanning for allies in the room. But Crockett held her ground. She raised a finger gently, signaling him to wait, and continued. "With all due respect," she said, her tone unwavering, "the evidence does not support your summary, and the public deserves clarity, not deflection." A ripple ran through the chamber. Journalists exchanged quick glances, scribbling notes furiously. Staffers whispered to one another, as if to process what they were witnessing in real time. The temperature in the room rose, subtle yet undeniable, like a storm gathering strength. Patel's confidence, once palpable, began to show signs of strain. His gestures became sharper, his replies slightly rushed, betraying the friction between his persona and the reality Crockett imposed. Crockett leaned slightly forward, letting silence fill the space between statements. Every pause was strategic, every glance measured. Her precision contrasted starkly with Patel's increasing agitation, creating a tension that the cameras captured with cinematic clarity. Each word she delivered landed with weight, each challenge a reminder of the stakes involved. The room seemed to contract, attention focused entirely on the clash unfolding at the center of the chamber. And then, for a moment, the hearing seemed to freeze. Patel's eyes narrowed, his lips pressed into a line, a flash of uncertainty betraying his usual self-assurance. Crockett's steady breathing, her deliberate calm, made the tension almost tangible. Everyone in the room sensed it. The equilibrium had shifted, and the confrontation was approaching a pivotal moment. But Crockett wasn't done. She had been waiting for this moment. The moment she would drop the fact that would shatter Patel's confidence completely. The air thickened with anticipation. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones captured every subtle inflection. And the audience, whether present in the chamber or watching across screens, felt the weight of history pressing down. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine the narrative and leave no room for pretense. Jasmine Crockett's eyes narrowed, calm yet unwavering, as she opened her folder. The rustle of papers sounded louder than usual in the hushed chamber, amplified by the tension that had been building over the past minutes. Every eye turned toward her, every camera lens zoomed in, capturing the poised figure of a woman about to dismantle a narrative that had been carefully constructed over years. Her presence alone seemed to make the air heavier, thick with anticipation. "Let's review the evidence together," she began, voice steady, measured, each word deliberate. She held a document forward, letting it catch the light for just a moment before continuing. "This report, dated 6 months ago, directly contradicts your previous statements regarding oversight and compliance. The figures do not align with the claims you've presented to this committee." Her voice echoed slightly, the chamber's acoustics emphasizing the weight of every syllable. Patel shifted in his seat, a slight tightening of his jaw, the first crack in the armor of his confidence. He opened his mouth, perhaps to interrupt, but Crockett's gaze held him in place. She continued, each pause purposeful, each line a surgical strike. "Furthermore, internal correspondence obtained through official channels demonstrates repeated attempts to highlight discrepancies, all of which were ignored in your public testimony. These emails, memos, and reports are all verifiable, and each one undermines the narrative you have presented here today." The chamber's atmosphere thickened. Staffers leaned forward, pens hovering, while reporters scribbled frantically, some whispering into recorders or phones. The subtle sound of the papers shifting in Crockett's hands punctuated each revelation, almost like a metronome counting down to Patel's unraveling. He glanced at the documents, eyes flicking, searching for gaps, for anything that could allow him to regain control. But the facts were relentless, unyielding. "Now," Crockett said, flipping to another page, "let's examine the timeline you've asserted." Each statement, when cross-referenced with internal documentation, reveals inconsistencies. For example, on January 12th, you claimed that certain protocols were followed. Yet, emails from your own team indicate those protocols were delayed by several weeks. This is not conjecture. This is evidence. The public deserves accuracy, and the record demands it. Patel's smirk, once so confident, had vanished. His fingers tapped nervously against the table. A brief stutter slipped into his next sentence, barely perceptible, but unmistakable to the room. He faltered, a flicker of frustration crossing his face, the first clear sign that Crockett's methodical assault was working. She did not pause to gloat. She let the facts speak. Each piece of evidence was a hammer striking at the foundation of his carefully constructed certainty. She leaned slightly forward, voice steady, eyes locked on Patel. "And finally," she said, producing a third document, "the official minutes of the prior committee meeting reflect statements directly at odds with your public testimony. Not only are the statements verifiable, but they were confirmed by multiple independent sources. The question is simple. Will the record reflect truth, or will it continue to be shaped by misdirection?" The chamber seemed to inhale collectively. Staffers whispered in disbelief. Reporters glanced at one another, pens moving faster, phones tapping out updates. Gasps emerged from the gallery, subtle at first, then louder as the realization sank in. The magnitude of Crockett's precision became undeniable. She had not just confronted Patel. She had dismantled the narrative with irrefutable clarity. Patel's posture crumpled imperceptibly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, lips pressed into a thin line. The smirk that had defined his confidence was gone, replaced by a tension that spoke volumes. For the first time in the chamber, his poise faltered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A shallow sigh escaped him. Words that might have once deflected scrutiny failed to materialize. Crockett's calm did not waver. She continued, her voice carrying the cadence of authority and the precision of a legal mind honed over years of advocacy. Each fact, each contradiction, each reference to documentation landed like a pebble thrown into a still pond, sending ripples across the entire room. The staffers, the reporters, the audience watching live. All were caught in the shockwave of what they were witnessing. Live tweets erupted instantly. Crockett just exposed Patel. He has no answers. This is a masterclass in accountability. Memes would follow later, videos clipped and shared. But in that chamber, the immediacy of the moment was electric. Headshakes, whispered reassurances between staffers, the tapping of pens. All reflected the collective recognition that the balance of power had shifted. For Patel, the collapse was internal as well as visible. The confidence that had carried him for years now seemed fragile, fleeting. He tried to regain control, but each attempt was met with another precise statement, another verifiable fact. Crockett had anticipated every possible evasion, every possible interruption, and had prepared evidence that left him with no room to maneuver. The climax of the exchange approached, a quiet tension that filled every corner of the room. Crockett's voice, steady and unyielding, carried the weight of preparation, morality, and truth. Each revelation compounded the last, creating a crescendo of undeniable clarity. Patel's earlier confidence, once so magnetic, now seemed almost performative, a fragile mask that could not withstand the weight of fact. And as she paused, letting the evidence settle, letting the chamber absorb the implications, the audience understood. The confrontation was over. The facts had won. Patel's defenses had crumbled under precision, preparation, and courage. Yet even in that victory, the moment did not conclude. But the humiliation didn't end in that room. It was only beginning. The moment Crockett's words echoed through the chamber, it didn't stay confined to the marble walls, or the hushed reporters scribbling furiously at the hearing table. Within minutes, clips began circulating online, first shared by journalists live tweeting the session, then picked up by viewers who could barely believe what they had seen. The calm authority, the surgical precision, the undeniable facts laid bare, all of it spread like wildfire. Hashtags ignited. Hashtag Crockett clips, hashtag truth over spin, hashtag fact check masterclass. The narrative that had started in a single congressional hearing now pulsed across the digital landscape. Across social media, reactions poured in from every corner. A young journalist wrote, "Watching Crockett dismantle Patel is the most compelling example of accountability I've ever seen in real time. Absolute masterclass." A college student, sharing the clip with friends, commented, "This is why we study civics, because moments like this remind us what leadership should look like." Memes proliferated almost instantly, split-screen comparisons of Patel's faltering confidence and Crockett's calm intensity, captions that highlighted the gap between arrogance and preparation, between spin and truth. The humor was sharp, yes, but beneath the laughter was admiration, a recognition that someone had finally spoken courageously and effectively. Community leaders weighed in. A local civil rights advocate posted, "This is more than politics. This is representation." Crockett just showed millions that integrity is not optional, it is demanded. Online forums buzzed with debate, but unlike the usual noise, these discussions centered on facts, on evidence, on clarity. People who had felt unseen or unheard suddenly saw a figure who not only reflected their values, but wielded them with authority, demonstrating that meticulous preparation and moral courage could, in fact, triumph over hubris. Television and digital commentators amplified the moment further. News segments replayed her statements in slow motion, dissecting each phrase, each document, each pause. Panel discussions debated her methodical approach, her calm but assertive delivery, and Patel's unraveling demeanor. Late-night shows seized the opportunity as well, framing her precision as both instructive and emblematic of the kind of leadership audiences craved. "She doesn't just speak, she dismantles," one commentator said. And she does it without theatrics, without yelling, without losing herself in the chaos. Even the casual viewer felt swept up in the ripple effect. Tweets circulated from those who had never followed congressional hearings, but now found themselves engaged, captivated, and inspired. Finally, one user wrote, "Someone in office actually cares about the truth." Another shared, "I watched the clip 3 times. Every time, I feel like courage and preparation win." The clip became more than evidence. It became a cultural touchstone, a benchmark for what citizens could expect from those entrusted with public service. The energy was contagious. People posted not only about the clip itself, but about what it represented. The triumph of diligence over performance, of facts over bravado, of responsibility over self-interest. Across comment threads, emojis of applause, raised fists, and fire-punctuated statements of support. Even those who had been skeptical of politics felt something shift. They sensed, however fleetingly, that the system could still hold individuals accountable when someone refused to let spin dominate the narrative. For Crockett's supporters, the pride was palpable. She had validated experiences and values that many felt were constantly overlooked. Her precise, fact-driven dismantling of Patel's narrative felt personal to them, as though someone in power had finally echoed their frustration, their need for honesty, and their desire for leadership rooted in integrity. Across live streams and forums, people debated the nuances of her argument, analyzed her methodology, and shared clips of her most decisive moments. Each share, each retweet, each discussion reinforced the collective understanding that this was more than a hearing. This was a movement, a demonstration of accountability in action. And yet, even as the social media storm raged, with every share and mention amplifying her victory, there was a sense that the story was not yet complete. The clip, though viral, was only one chapter of a larger narrative about truth, courage, and accountability. Commentators, journalists, and viewers alike sensed that what had occurred in that chamber was a signal, a message about the standards that should be demanded from those in power. People were watching not just for the spectacle, but for the lessons embedded in her performance. And in the middle of all this, Crockett delivered one final message, one that transcended the viral moment, one that would resonate far beyond hashtags, memes, and trending videos. As the echoes of the hearing faded, Jasmine Crockett allowed herself a moment to reflect, not on the spectacle, the viral clips, or the reactions flooding social media, but on the principle that had guided her through every challenge. Truth was never easy. It required preparation, patience, and above all, courage. The hearing was more than a confrontation with one individual. It was a test of the values that underpin public service, a reminder that those entrusted with power carry the responsibility, not only to govern, but to uphold integrity at every turn. Crockett thought back to her early days, when the obstacles she faced seemed insurmountable. Working-class neighborhoods, long hours, voices that often went unheard. All of it had instilled in her the understanding that courage begins with commitment, and integrity begins with self-respect. The hearing, intense as it had been, reflected the same lessons on a larger stage. That arrogance and misinformation may appear strong, but they crumble when met with diligence, preparation, and unwavering moral clarity. It was never about humiliating Kash Patel, she reminded herself. The goal had always been far greater: to defend facts, to protect public trust, and to reaffirm that dignity and accountability were not negotiable. Every pause, every fact presented, every contradiction exposed was a commitment to something larger than herself, a signal that the work of governance must honor the people it serves. In this way, the confrontation became more than political theater. It became a lesson in leadership, a model for what it means to act with integrity under pressure. Crockett recognized the stakes beyond the chamber walls. The moment had resonated with millions, especially those who had long felt marginalized, overlooked, or dismissed. People watching saw someone who refused to bow to intimidation, who trusted evidence over bluster, and who honored the public with honesty rather than spin. For her supporters, it was more than validation. It was inspiration. For the public at large, it was a reminder that leadership could be principled, measured, and courageous all at once. At its core, the hearing crystallized a universal truth: that standing up to power requires more than voice. It requires preparation, conviction, and the willingness to persist when others expect you to yield. Crockett's calm, factual dismantling of Patel's assertions demonstrated that courage is not always loud or flamboyant. Sometimes it is precise, deliberate, and unflinching. It is the kind of courage that reverberates beyond a single room, beyond a single viral clip, echoing in the minds of those who witness it, and inspiring them to demand more from themselves and their leaders. She thought of the countless people who had faced false narratives in their own lives: students denied opportunity, workers ignored by bureaucracy, communities overlooked in public discourse. In the chamber, her role had been to give truth a voice, to ensure that facts could not be buried under performance or arrogance. That same principle applied everywhere. In daily struggles, in public life, and in the choices each person makes when confronted with challenges. Standing for truth, standing for justice, standing for dignity. These were the foundations upon which progress is built. The lesson was clear, and it was simple. Public service is not a stage for ego. It is a responsibility to others. Arrogance and spin may dominate headlines temporarily, but facts endure. Courage may feel like a single act in a tense moment, but it ripples outward, touching lives and shaping expectations long after the cameras have left. Every individual who dares to speak truth in the face of pressure contributes to a culture where accountability and integrity are not optional. They are expected. At its core, the hearing crystallized a universal truth: that standing up to power requires more than voice. It requires preparation, conviction, and the willingness to persist when others expect you to yield. Crockett's calm, factual dismantling of Patel's assertions demonstrated that courage is not always loud or flamboyant. Sometimes it is precise, deliberate, and unflinching. It is the kind of courage that reverberates beyond a single room, beyond a single viral clip, echoing in the minds of those who witness it, and inspiring them to demand more from themselves and their leaders. She thought of the countless people who had faced false narratives in their own lives. Students denied opportunity, workers ignored by bureaucracy, communities overlooked in public discourse. In the chamber, her role had been to give truth a voice, to ensure that facts could not be buried under performance or arrogance. That same principle applied everywhere. In daily struggles, in public life, and in the choices each person makes when confronted with challenges. Standing for truth, standing for justice, standing for dignity. These were the foundations upon which progress is built. In the end, Crockett understood that the hearing would be remembered not simply for the clash, but for what it symbolized: the triumph of preparation over posturing, of dignity over bluster, of truth over noise. And as she considered the journey that had brought her to this moment, the early lessons, the mentors, the struggles, the advocacy, the emotional weight of it all coalesced into a single, resonant realization. In a world full of noise, the truth still echoes louder when someone brave enough gives it a voice. Kash Patel walked into the chamber with confidence, prepared to assert control. He left exposed, his arrogance laid bare, undone by the calm, precise, unyielding force of Jasmine Crockett's truth. Facts had prevailed. Dignity had prevailed. The spectacle of the hearing became more than a moment in Congress. It became a symbol of what happens when courage meets preparation, when integrity refuses to yield to bluster. If you believe truth deserves defenders like Crockett, now is the time to act. Every like, every share, every comment is more than engagement. It is a statement, a declaration that accuracy, honesty, and accountability matter. Every voice that joins the conversation strengthens the call for leadership grounded in integrity, and reminds the world that misinformation and arrogance do not go unchallenged. Leave your thoughts below. Share the clip with friends, family, and anyone who needs to see that courage can triumph in even the most daunting rooms. Subscribe to stay connected to stories where facts, justice, and moral clarity guide the narrative, where leaders who embody dignity set the standard for all of us. Because moments like these are only the beginning. The ripple doesn't end in the chamber, on screens, or in trending hashtags. It continues with every person who refuses to stay silent, who demands accountability, and who champions truth in their own life. Raise your voice. Stand with clarity. And remember, because voices like yours keep the truth alive, no arrogance, no spin, and no falsehood can ever silence what matters most.